Okay. The first row we hear you.
First row, yeah. She asked the first row. First of all, means I feel like I could sit down and the evening could be over. This has been so inspiring already. Knowing your dedication to learning, your completion of Kedushin, just getting inspired and seeing. I mean, he's a great teacher. I was in his class once when I was in Ramat Beit Shemesh. I went. Ami sent me actually. But it's just amazing. The dedication to learning is no doubt a tremendous chus for your father. And Rachel, everything you do here in the community, including organizing this Shiur in the merit and this chus of your late father is a tremendous chus. And I was just talking to someone a second before. It's like we can't even ask each other now, like, how are you doing? Because there's like either the fake automated response, like I'm doing great. Like no, I'm not doing great, right? It's like what I used to say like a month ago. I can't say that anymore. But sometimes we say it anyways, but we don't really mean it. And sometimes in between the tears, like we feel proud and we feel hopeful. But it's an incredibly, you just see hearing the kids saying, "Am Yisrael Chai," I just started crying. Like, because we're always on the edge of tears. It's just the existence, the reality we're living now. Especially, we didn't need the coals to be stoked at all. But just what's going on in the city right now. Just it's really scary. Like we're all thinking questions that we don't like to say out loud. But how many more years are Jews going to be in Canada for? You know, in France, in Paris, and you know, in Europe. Okay, 3 to 5 more years. Like how many? Like we all know we're going to end up in Israel. We know that's the future. But we're used to thinking, you know, in the future, my grandkids will be in Israel full time. But us will be here. And then these events, what's going on in Israel? Like my sisters tell me, you know, they feel safer in Israel than we do here now. Why there was shootings in schools in Montreal, and if that's what it was. Okay, it was at night. No one was there. Everyone was safe. But let's call it what it was. Don't listen to the local news clippings that there was vandalism in the middle of the night. No, there was guns shot at Jewish schools and arson attempts at a shul and Federation building, all within the past 4 days in Montreal. I mean, it's scary. It's very unsettling, as if our reality. In Israel, it's unsettling, but we know how it's going to end. You know, here it's also unsettling, and we know how it's going to end, and the ending is unsettling. That Jewish history teaches us. And it was with that, the one thing they can never take away from us is the ability to get together and learn Torah. Get together, learn Torah. One time, the Gemara tells us that there was the Romans made a legislation that thou must not teach Torah in public. And came Rabbi Akiva, and he was teaching Torah in public. And his student says, "What are you doing? Like, how could you? I mean, you're going to get caught. It's going to be a mess." And that's actually what ended up happening to him. But before that happened is the final event where he was combed to death. But before that, he says, "What, they're telling me not to teach Torah? Fine. So go tell a fish not to swim in water." Right? It's good. It doesn't work either way. So you can't, you know, there's one thing that you can never tell a Jew not to do, which is get together and learn Torah publicly. You're telling me you're going to kill me if I don't do that? We're dead if we don't do it either. So this is one thing that our enemies could absolutely never touch us, never get in the way of our ability to get together and learn Torah. And with that, these words of Torah should be in the Nishmas Osher ben Shalom ve'etel, or Osher ben Shalom HaCohen ve'etel, right? Okay. His neshama Shavaliya, and these words of Torah should be Aliyah's his neshama, but also for the safety, as we already prayed. We already said the tefillah for the chayalim, the safety for the soldiers. It should be for the return and the health of the captives, and the ultimate success. The success which we know is ultimate. It should be quickly. It should be quickly, with the damage and the pain and the tears to be mitigated. Amen. Okay. So the topic that we're going to talk about tonight, as it's already been mentioned, is the topic of Milchemet Mitzvah, which we know that in many times in Jewish history we have had to pick up arms and defend ourselves, and sometimes we've had even to preemptively attack in order to keep the security or to make sure enemies don't come close. And as we'll see, source number 1, we'll look at it right now. There are 2 categories of milchamos, 2 categories of wars that could take place in Jewish history. One is called a milchamas rishos, which is which is an elective war, right? And one is called a Milchemet mitzvah, which means a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to do it. It's a chova. It's a responsibility, like Rabbi Yehuda and the Gemara calls it. It's an obligatory war. You must go to war, Jewish people. It's not elective. You must do it. So there's two categories, and each one has different guidelines in Jewish law, how we go, who goes to war, and how we go to war. And the Mishnah in Sota, very long Mishnah in the 8th parak of Sota, delineates the differences between the two types of wars. But what I want to focus on in this Mishnah is really the existence of these two categories of wars, where it says that for a regular elective war, which means the king of Israel says in a certain context, as we'll see in a second, the Rambam will explain, and even if the king of Israel says, guys, troops, commanders, call the units up, we're going to war, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a Milchemet mitzvah. So it was said earlier by Rachel, spoiler alert, accurately, that what our brothers and sisters, the teenagers and young adults in Israel are doing right now, Rachel said it was a Milchemet mitzvah, right? So spoiler alert, that was true, but it's not always true that when the king of Israel, as we'll see a little later on, when the government of Israel could be a modern manifestation or of a malchus of a king of Israel when it comes to war. Just because we got the command from above, from the country, from the commanders, from the IDF, it's time to go to war. That doesn't mean synonymously that the war is Milchemet mitzvah, as we'll see. Okay, so on a regular elective war, right? Not everyone is drafted. Not everyone is drafted. Women could stay home. Someone who just built a house who haven't moved in yet could stay home. Someone who just got engaged or just got and hasn't got married could stay home. If you planted a garden, as it says in Parshas Kisavot at the end, if you planted a garden and you haven't inaugurated it, you could stay home. Certain people get as they would call probably in the modern Israel, a patur, right? An exemption from battle. But that is not the case for a Milchemet mitzvah. For a war of a mitzvah, not an elective war, not a rishus, but a mitzvah war, every single person, even women, have to be drafted into the army. It doesn't mean they have to fight. The Gemara explains it could be they can aid in the battle in other ways, logistical ways, intelligence, and other ways, like the entire country of Israel and us too, as we're trying to experience. And we're all part of the war efforts. And that's something which is unique to a Milchemet mitzvah. Okay. But source number one is really just introducing to us the existence of both these categories. Source number two, the Rambam writes like this, that one of the main differences between the two types of wars is there is a very clear law when it comes to if you're the king of Israel, anyone planning on being the king of Israel one day, well, take note, if you're planning on having that on your resume, that thou must not go to a elective war if there is a Milchemet mitzvah waiting to happen. You have to prioritize. And we'll see exactly what they are right just in the next sentence. But if there's a Milchemet mitzvah which is calling you, you can't say, well, we'll do that next year. But this year our focus is going to be some elective war. Now, what's the difference between an elective war? How can we discern the difference between the two contexts? So the Rambam explains like this. Ve'ezo hi Milchemet mitzvah. What is a Milchemet mitzvah? What's considered an obligatory war? And he gives three different categories. Number one, Zu Milchemet Shiva Amamim, right? This is the war that we siege against the 7 nations. Where are the 7 nations? Anyone know? Kanani, Chiti, Yevusi. Exactly. Very good. We say it in Sukkot and Zimra. When the Jewish people entered the land of Israel, thank you. When the Jewish people entered the land of Israel under the leadership of Yehoshua ben Nun, in what was called back then Eretz Canaan, there were 7 indigenous nations. We're indigenous, but before that, they were indigenous, right? The indigenous nations of the land of Israel, they were all wicked, they were all evil in their interpersonal relationships, and they would steal from each other. It was V'temaleo haaretz chamas. I know, borrowed terminology from Parshat Noach, but that's how it was described with the 7 nations that lived there. And we were commanded by God to go into the land of Israel, cross the Jordan River, and to wipe out the 7 nations and to settle the land of Israel. That was our God-given, divinely given command for the first plan of action when the Jewish people crossed the Yarden. So we crossed the Yarden, we went to Yericho, then we essentially took 14 years, seven of conquest of the tribes under the helm of Yoshua ben Nun to conquer and settle the land of Israel. So that is category number one. Okay? Category number two, Milchemas Amalek. Right? Once a year, we remember to not forget. Remember, don't forget. Right? If you really want us to forget, just don't tell us to remember. Right? Don't think of a pink elephant. What are you all thinking of? Pink elephant, right? So so that's going to be a behind-the-scenes questions, which we'll get to. If the Torah really wanted us to forget Amalek, why are you telling us to remember to forget it every year? That's like a really bad way to ensure that the Jewish people will forget as Zecher Amalek, right? So what's going on over there? But the destruction of the nation of Amalek, the antithesis of evil in the world, we have to eradicate that. And when they show their ugly face, sieging war against them is category number two definition number two of a Milchemet mitzvah, an obligatory Milchama. The last and final one, Ve'ezras Yisrael miatzar sheba aleihem, a war fought to assist Israel from an enemy which attacks them. Okay, so based on these three definitions, what do you think? Is today's war, Milchemet mitzvah? Obviously, because it fits like a glove, right? With the third definition of what the Rambam defines for us, a Milchemet mitzvah. There was clearly a security, not just threat, a massacre, bigger than we've seen in one day since the Holocaust, against Israel from an enemy who hates us, who in their constitution is simply one thing, to eradicate every Jew in the world. That those missiles, those guns, those bullets come to us. So we got to push back on that as fiercely as we could. And that's called a Milchemet mitzvah. That's called an obligatory war. That means there's no such thing, oh, I built a house, or I'm newly married, I can't go to war. No. Everyone is drafted. 300,000 reservists get called up. Doesn't matter the sensitivity of the family. Everyone's got to fight in their way, whether it's on the battlefield, or logistics, or intelligence. Everyone is drafted for this fight. It's Milchemet mitzvah. What's interesting to note is to look back at some rabbinic literature of historical wars that were fought in Israel. So in source number 3, Rabbi Zolly Claman, who's just a remarkable person. People don't realize this. How many people in the room consider themselves experts in Irish history? That one's for you, Brian. Okay? So before Rav Herzog was the chief rabbi of Israel, he moved to what was then called Palestine in 1936 to take over none other than Rav Kook after he was nifter, after he passed away. So before that, he was the chief rabbi of Ireland. And before he was the chief rabbi of Ireland, about I think 6 years or 8 years, he was the rabbi of Dublin. Right before. And what I find so interesting about his life, which is just not brought to light too often, is he's one of very few people that we know about who we could say about them, they could say about themselves, that they lived in a country, in a time, through 2 wars of independence. Because what year was the Irish War of Independence, Brian? 1919. 1918 started, right, okay. I'm right though. Okay.
You know you're Irish.
Well, okay. I did have time for research. Okay. All right. But 1919, he was in Ireland as a chief rabbi of Dublin when the Irish War of Independence defined itself as an independent state, right? And then the next year, I think it was in 1920, or 21, he became the chief rabbi of Ireland. And then 1936, he moved to Israel. And of course, in 1945, he was living it obviously in a much more internally defined, emotionally committed way. He got to be the chief rabbi of Israel during the Milchemet HaShichrur, during the War of Independence. And he got to see both Ireland and Lahavdil, but both good things, Israel become an independent state while he was a resident, a rabbi. He was actually very politically involved, as you can imagine, in Ireland as well. And he was like the rabbi of one of the major political parties that birthed the state of the independent state of Ireland. So he got to do that twice in his life. Unbelievable thing. It's an unbelievable thing. And of course, we know very fondly his grandson, current President Isaac Herzog, and his 2 children, Chaim Herzog and Yaakov Herzog were both very strong politically in the IDF and very, very strong, very important and integral in Jewish history. So just really an incredible family. And Rabbi Yitzchak Halevi Herzog, the very first chief rabbi, Ashkenaz chief rabbi of Israel, has a responsa in his sefer, Shas Juvas Echel Yitzchak, and Or Chaim Simon Lamed Zayin, where he was talking about the Milchemet HaShechur. He wrote this before the War of Independence, right, before 1948, but he was talking about it. Well, let's read the words inside, it's very powerful. I just copy and pasted a couple lines. He says, Lida'ati, according to my opinion, this has the full bona fide halachic status of a obligatory war. And you're going to say back to me, you're going to complain to Herzog. He said, well, the king of Israel needs to declare war for it to be a Milchemet mitzvah, which the Mishnah does say that. But he says, and we don't have a king. We have Avinu, the king of the world, but we don't have a king. We don't have a David HaMelech. We don't have a Yoshio HaMelech. So what do? But he contests like this. Avahatzibor Kulo, the ubiquitous and unanimous decision to go to war from the community, O Rubo, or even the majority, which is halachic veracity of the entirety. Kefishabir Kvar Kodmi Hagaon Zecher Tzadik Kadosh Levacha, referring to Rav Kook. He says this argument to say that the ubiquitous understanding of the Jewish people that we need to go to war replaces the need to have a melech, to have an actual king, and that's my predecessor. Again, he was the chief rabbi immediately after Rav Kook. Rav Kook, he says, already argued this, that the modern state of Israel, the government's independence, that the government and the IDF decide we're going to war, and everyone agrees, or the majority agrees, and almost by definition, and a democratically decided government, that means the majority is going to agree with the decision to go to war. Well, guess what? That defines that as a Milchemet mitzvah because it replaces the need for a melech, the whole utility of the king, the whole necessity of a king to declare war, for it to be defined as a Milchemet mitzvah, because the king represents the Jewish people. Well, the majority of the Jewish people also represents the Jewish people. So he says we're okay defining it as a bona fide Milchemet mitzvah, even though we are missing what you would have thought to be a key ingredient, which is the announcement of the Melech Yisrael. And I just wrote in the footnotes because it's in a similar vein, but for those who are interested, Rav Shlomo Goren Zitzel writes in a very similar argument that the Lebanon War, the Milchemet Shalom HaGalil, in 82, also had this same definition. And I put this exact language in the footnotes for those who are interested in more reading about rabbinic literature of historical wars in Israel being defined as Milchemet mitzvah. Okay, so clearly we have already defined this as Milchemet mitzvah, what we're going through right now. What I just think is an intriguing line of thinking or line of thought or rabbit hole to go down is we have to remind ourselves that the Rambam did have 3 different definitions of what a Milchemet mitzvah is. The first was the 7 nations, right? The second was Amalek, and the third one is the one that we've been lingering on as of yet, and saying that the current war fits into that last and third one, which is the protection and the security of the state of Israel. But I think there is a very strong argument, as we'll see, to say that not only does the current war of Israel fit into the third category, but it also fits into one other, namely Amalek. Who is Amalek? How do we define them? If we find them, do they actually have to be a blood relative to the original nation of Amalek? It was a nation. This is what we're all going to look at right now. And I want to kind of spoon feed you something which was encrypted in the Rambam, in Maimonides, for many, many years, until the great Reb Chaim Mibrisk brought the following idea to light. I'm going to make it obvious to you, right? But pretend you're learning these old manuscripts of the Rambam without highlights, without underlines. You can imagine how this would kind of go under the radar for hundreds and hundreds of years until Reb Chaim Mibrisk brought it to light. But like this, let's read 2 halachos inside together. The Rambam in Hilchos Malachim U'Milchamos, the 5th parak. We're going to read the 4th halacha, and then we're going to flip the page, and we're going to read the 5th halacha. So these are back to back, okay? So like this. First, the Rambam talks about that first of 3 definitions, namely the wiping out, the eradication or the conquest against the 7 nations. He says like this. Mitzvahs asig lahachrim shivas amamin. It is a biblical command that the Torah says, hey, Jewish people, go into Israel and conquest, eradicate the 7 nations that live there, because, parenthetically, Rambam doesn't say this, but they were already divinely decided because of their iniquities and misbehaviors that God was going to destroy them anyways. Instead of a flood, instead of a thunderstorm, instead of a tsunami, it was going to be the Jewish people coming to get their land anyway. So it's kind of taking care of 2 birds with 1 stone. The Jewish people get the land they're supposed to get, and the 7 nations get the death penalty that they're supposed to get. Right. So that's how we understand things from a bird's eye view. Okay, because the Torah says, "Hacharim tacharimim." Go, the land is yours. Destroy the 7 nations and live in it. Fine. V'kol shabali yado echad miham below haragu over below sasation amar lo techayes kol neshama. It's supposed to be a very intense war. Let's just paraphrase. Okay, and then he finishes off with 3 words: ukfar avad zichram. And this is not a practical biblical law anymore. This is, like the Rambam would probably paraphrase if he was an English speaker, this is an obsolete mitzvah. There's certain mitzvahs which are obsolete because they were accomplished, right? It says, once the job is done, the job is done. So we don't know where they are. They have successfully been eradicated from the world. We don't know who the 7 nations are. Yebusi, Plishtim, we don't know who they are. Chiti. So the mitzvah's done. Fine. And that's why if you look in the Chinuch as well, source number 5, it says Ha'ina nowadays Einon Mitzuyim, switch the page over, source 5. Einon Mitzuyim bezeh kikfar Allah Sancherv ubilbil asa'olam b'chol the parish muru. That Sancherv already kind of took every nation and put them in exile in other countries. So there's no true. We don't know who the true Chiti are. We don't know who the true Plishtim are, right? So it's just an obsolete mitzvah. It doesn't exist anymore. Now, source number 6. The very next halacha in the Rambam in Maimonides, he talks about no longer the 7 nations, but he talks about the second and third categories, the category of Amalek. Okay, and he says something very similar at the beginning. It's a mitzvah, positive mitzvah, le'abed zecher Amalek, very similar to how he said the 7 nations. And he goes on and he goes on and he goes on, and there's 3 words which he said in the previous halacha in the context of the 7 nations, which he does not say over here. What are those 3 words? The 3 words that I underlined in source 4. Ukfar avad zichram. That the remnants has already successfully been destroyed. And the Rambam seems to be hinting, and that's the point of Rav Chaim Brisk in source number 7, brought in Shas Shuvas Hanhagos of Rav Moshe Sternbach, but I heard it last week actually from Mordechai Willig, my brother's father-in-law. We were in Florida together. My brother made a bar mitzvah for his son, Rabbi Willig's grandson, and he quoted that he heard from Rav Soloveitchik in the name of Rav Chaim Brisk, last name Soloveitchik, same family. And the same thing, I just wanted to bring it in writing, so I found it in Rav Moshe Sternbach's sefer as well. And Rav Chaim Brisk, if you start at the bold in the second line, Shamati b'shem hagon Rav Chaim Brisk zecher tzadik levracha diak nifla, a baffling sensitivity in the words of the Rambam, the Lashon Rambam. Sheposik mitzvahs asig lahachrim shivas amamin u'mesayim ukfar avad zichron. When it comes to the context of the 7 nations, the Rambam's last 3 words were they don't exist anymore. They're not here. Because Sancher already made a mess of the cultures and the countries. But then when he continues in the very next halacha about Amalek, lo siyem sha'avad zichram. Over here, the Rambam doesn't write that Amalek's not around anymore, which implies that Amalek is around. So who is Amalek? We have to do DNA tests and see if they match up to the nation thousands of years ago? No. Umevar hagon Rav Chaim sheba Amalek mitzvah hila abed zecher Amalek. The mitzvah, the command of the Jewish people is not to wipe out the DNA bloodline of the nation like it was for the 7 nations, but rather hainu le'abed shitatam v'sinatam. It's to eradicate the evil that defined Amalek. And the people died; they don't exist anymore. But unfortunately, when the people died, that worldview of divine hatred towards the Jewish people, with the modus operandi of kill Jews as many as you could. Let's get rid of it, right? Jewish people represent good. So this nation, which represents eradicating good, defines evil. And that anti-Semitism, right? And the way Rav Mordechai Willig said it in the name of Rav Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik Zatzal, is that any nation who comes into the world and says publicly, screams it from the rooftops, that we are here to kill the Jewish people. Says Rav Yoshe Ber in the name of Rav Chaim Rebbe, that's Amalek. That's the face of Amalek, and it's the Germans were Amalek. If we had an army, which we didn't then, things would have been a lot different, and there would have been a Milchemet Mitzvah to go against the Nazis and to kill them. Nazis don't exist anymore, but Amalek still does. Today, it's manifested in the ideology of Hamas, in the ideology of Hezbollah, and in anyone that is here in Montreal, in North America. We see the protests, right? We see what happened to the students at Concordia 2 days ago. The people who are just tearing down posters of babies, of teenagers, of elderly, of women. That those hostages, their faces don't deserve being out in public, right? Because we're the aggressors. The Jewish people should cease fire, right? After thousands of people were slaughtered, innocent civilians, cease fire. All that claim emanating from Hamas, emanating from the Palestinians, that is Amalek. And not only could we define today's war based on the third and final category to be Milchemet Amalek, that we're protecting the security of Israel, absolutely. But we can also have a double definition of today's war as Milchemet Mitzvah, as an obligatory mitzvah, because we're also eradicating Amalek. The job is not done, right? In the mystical sources, Kabbalistic literature, the job done is synonymous with the Messianic era. The Messianic era is a reality. It's different. Same, we'll live in Israel instead of here. We'll have jobs, we'll have governance. The same thing as today. The difference is the global void and absence of the ideology of Amalek, of shitatam v'sinatam. That's the difference between now and the Messianic era, right? So if the job will be done, dovetailing in an absolute perfect dovetail with the coming of better days that we believe are imminently ahead. So that's what I think the main takeaway is on a technical level, but I think it's very powerful as well, is understand that today, as Rachel said, is definitely a Milchemet Mitzvah, what our brothers and sisters, what our boys and girls are going through, but not just for the obvious reason, but for the Timcha Zecher Amalek reason as well. Right? Amalek is not, that's why we tell you don't forget it. We don't actually want people to forget it. You need to actively eradicate it, Jewish people. God is telling us in the Torah. That's why you have to review every year that Haman, that was Amalek, yes. And the Nazis, they were Amalek. And it's appropriate we're talking about this on Kristallnacht. Absolutely. And that's what we couldn't do before the state of Israel, we're doing now actively. We had to sit back, relax, and be the victims of Amalek before the state. Now we're not victims anymore. There were many victims. Those victims pushed us and to the global front stage to really doing what we should have been doing the whole time, which is to proactively eradicate the sinah and the shita of Amalek, which the Jewish people are doing as we speak. It's a magical time in history with a tremendous amount of pain and loss. But the Jewish people, since the time of Purim, have never had the opportunity to say, our army against yours, let's go. Jews against Amalek, let's bring it on. And we know what the end is going to be because we've read, the Yavanim did it, the Persians tried to do it. It always ends the same way. There's always casualties, pain and suffering along the way. But we know that this is a tremendously holy mission of Milchemet Mitzvah to finally take care of business. And we know that dovetails into the Messianic era. I think one more source over here together, source number 8. Being that we have defined this as Milchemet Mitzvah not only for the obvious reason, but also because it's against Amalek, I personally gain a lot of strength by looking back at the different wars against Amalek that we fought. And homework for tonight, read the whole chapter, Perek Lamed, and Shmuel Aleph inside. I just gave 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 psukim that we'll do together. And you'll see how eerily similar it is to our current Amalek. They always work in the same way because it's pure evil. Evil's evil. Pure good is very predictable. Pure evil is very predictable. Okay? So you'll see, we'll read from what happened in the times of Shmuel, but it also could be news clippings from 30 days ago. And where I ended these psukim, but you could continue reading tonight as homework, that's the paradigm shift. That's when things start getting good in this specific vacuum of a story in Sefer Shmuel Samuel 1, Parak 30. Okay, let's read together, and this is really the closing statement. Vayhi b'vo David. David heard that there was a terrible attack to the Jewish people in Tziklak. Tziklak is an undefined. We know biblically that it was a city, but it's a big argument against academics exactly where it is on the modern day map. Some put it around 15 kilometers away from the Gaza Strip. That's just one line of thinking that it's literally right there. That's not my point, but just it's noteworthy. So Vayibi about David Va'anashav, so he came with his army to Tziklak b'yom hashlishi to see kind of what the level of damage was done, and what he heard was really bad for the Jewish people. V'ha'amaleki pashtu as Negev as Tziklak, v'yaku as Tziklak, v'yisrafu aso b'eish. Okay, the Amalekim, the Hamasnikim, same energy, same people, same ideology. They made a raid on the city against, right? And they had stormed and burned it down. Vayishbu as Hanashim, Asher ba mikaton v'ad gadol. There was no such thing as having mercy on a kid that looked a little innocent. They took women captive, children captive, and lo hamitu ish. Right, and they did not kill any, but they took them off. They took them all as hostages. They just went back to their Amaleki towns, now carrying hundreds of Jews. David came in, to go see what happened. The whole city was burnt down. And the people who were there, David included, as we'll see, their wives and their children and daughters were taken captive. Asher ito as kolam v'yivku, and David and the entire nation started crying uncontrollably. Well, listen to the next words of the Navi. Right? This is very descriptive. Ad asher ein bahem koach livkot. They cried until they couldn't cry anymore. There was no more tears. There was. What could you, after your daughter was taken captive and your son was burnt in the house? What could you cry when you spent a week? What could you do after that? There's no more tears left. And then it says, David nishbu. Even two of David king's wives were taken as captives. Achinoam. Okay, next. Okay, and it mentions a few captives by names. Last pasuk. But Teitzer David ma'od ki amro ha'am l'salko ki mara nefesh kol ha'am ish al banav the albanosav. What happens when things go bad? We blame the leaders, right? So they say, David, Bibi, chief of the IDF, this is your fault. Let's stone him. Let's make sure he doesn't see another day. It's their fault. How could they do this? Security should have been unchecked. They should have been called, right? That voice is the voice of not realizing that this is all Hashem that did it, right? It's above nature. And they were blaming David. And then the last words we'll finish with, and I'll describe to you how everything finishes. But Yitzchazek David b'Hashem Elokav. He turned inwards. And he reminded, this is Milchemet's mitzvah. This is not our war to win. This is Hashem's war to win. We're the conduits. Okay? And I really should have quoted a few more psukim. Because at the end of the story is every single captive, implied in the hundreds, were brought back to the Jewish people in good health. And the Jewish people avenged the attack, but it was property loss. It wasn't people lost. The Navi says that it was damage. It was property damage. They didn't kill everyone. And every captive was taken back into safety, including David's wife, two wives, including all the people that were mentioned here. All the captives were turned home. But the turning point, if you look at Parak Lamed, the 30th chapter, as one piece of literature, and you dissect it and analyze it, there's a horrible beginning, there's a shifting point, there's a paradigm shift, and there's a happy ending. And the shifting point is right over here. This is the axis that the parak is spinning on. But Yitzchazik David b'Hashem Elokav. And knowing that this is a Milchemet's mitzvah is synonymous to knowing that it's not our war to win. It's Hashem's war to win. He started it by creating the Jewish people and created the Amalek. We're the opposites of each other, and we're going to be in battle until the Messianic era. And the moment that we realize in united fronts, the army, the civilians, and the diaspora in Israel, that this is up to Hashem. The sacrifices, the karbanos, the tears, the suffering, it's all Hashem doing this to us, and we have to. It doesn't make us sit back and relax. We got to push. We got to fight, just like David did. We got to put in our all. But our all is Hashem guiding the sword, Hashem guiding the bullets, and knowing that it's all going to land just like every other battle of Amalek in world history has always ended, which is the Jewish people on top. And it's going to, hopefully this will be the last one, because Amalek will finally be eradicated Like when Bibi talks, he's literally quoting Tanakh, Dam ve'esh v'timros asha, and he's quoting Sukkim from Yoel, where the Navi is describing the very final battle against Amalek, that they're going to be eradicated. The Messianic era starts in the next parak in Yoel. And the secular Bibi, he's quoting these Sukkim. It's unbelievable. But we do believe this is the very final battle of the Jewish people, and this is the last act that the Jewish people will ever have to eradicate finally the name and the Zichram, Shitasam, and Sinasam. And we'll be able to live in a world where Chitatu Charvotam Liitim, that we can take all the M16s, which I don't think they use anymore, they use the Tavors, and we can melt them, and we can have pruning, and we can sit under the apple trees in peace and tranquility, because there won't be an Amalek. And once Amalek falls, all the other peripheral hatred to the Jewish people fall as well. We'll be able to live in peace and Shalom in Medinas Israel. With that, again, Aliyah to Shalom, to Osher ben Shalom HaCohen, and to Atzlachas Ha'am.
I was going to say. Rabbi Osher.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Rabbi, for the beautiful and inspiring shiur. And I just wanted to ask Noam, since he's not here usually, to do a Kel Malei Rachamim in our father's memory.
Yeah, I'll get it. Get your glasses. Just check.
Get your tuning fork.
We're fine. Should be used up for the
No, I'll do it without you find. You find it while I'm still.
כזוהר ים מסגירים, את נשמס, אבי מורי אשר בן שלום הכהן, שהלך לעולמו, בגן עדן תמנוחסו, לכן כל רחמים יזכירנו בחסד רבו לעולמים, יצרור את צור החיים את נשמסו, אדוני יבוא נחלסו, ינוח בשלום על משכבו, ולומר אמן.
Lebanon.